Hello again everyone, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to be finishing off build 3 of 3 Airfix 1/72 scale P51Ds. Absolutely love this little kit. I've decided to do this one in an RAAF scheme, so Royal Australian Air Force markings, just to be a little bit different from the other ones we've built. So I've built the Tuskegee, and I've built a Blue Nose, and obviously this one here. The construction's obviously in the first video, so you're going to skip most of that, and we're just going to start off pretty much where I start with the painting. So you can see I'm using blue tack here as a painting mask, just for something different. Never tried it before. I went a bit heavy with it, but it didn't really matter. But yeah, so I'm masking off the paint scheme for a Royal Australian Air Force aircraft of 1944-ish vintage. And we get started. We're doing NATO green, so XF67 for the first colour. I then come back a little bit later after I do that and add some XF62 olive drab for a little bit of post shading on it. But essentially I've already coated the model with the flat aluminium, so the Tamiya XF16, and I clear coated that. So once I did that, I clear coated that before I applied the masks, because I'm going to use a slightly different chipping technique to what I did in the other one. So you would have seen me use the Vallejo masking on the previous videos, and it's just a little bit heavy for this scale, and I really wanted a lot of chips on this aircraft. So generally speaking, the RAAF kept their planes pretty clean, but they did get fairly worn, so there was a fair bit of chipping on paint, things like that, even though the planes themselves weren't overly dirty, like my thumb is in this picture. But yeah, so they just wanted to replicate that, and you can see, peeling the mask off, I finally realised that I've got a lot of paint on my thumb. I thought I'd keep this in here for a bit of a giggle, and yeah, I always keep a little tub of the X20A thinner there for a bit of cleaning, and whenever I need to wipe stuff down, it's quite handy. I don't want to use that for the airbrush because it gets particulates in it all the time. But here we go. So I've taken the masks off. You can see I'm just using a toothpick to slowly chip away at the paint along the panel lines. Just add lots of tiny little chips, and the effect is actually really quite subtle. Even though I do it quite heavily on this kit. Just trying to keep them as small as possible. And really, I mean, there's a number of ways you could do it. You don't have to be as particular as I am with this, but you know, I had so much fun doing it. I really enjoyed it. It is somewhat random, just depends on the toothpick. So you see me flipping it over and changing the angle of it every now and then, because sometimes you get a slightly different edge at the end of the toothpick, so it might pick it up better than other ways. But yeah, so we basically do that along the green, all the green areas, and seal those in again with the coated clear, and then mask it off once more with a bit of Tamiya tape and some more of the blue tack here. And on this one, I'm actually now spraying the Royal Light Grey. Now, memory serves, I mix a tiny bit of a darker shade of grey with this, but then I come back over it with a lighter shade as well, just to do some post shading. See that effect there. It looks rather heavy with the masks on, but once you take the masks off, it sort of settles down. You might have noticed the rudder came off earlier, so instead of fixing that again and having it come off again, I just decided to do that separately. But, yeah, here we go, pulling the masks off. Now, as I said, I've clear coated the green underside, so I don't have to worry too much about chipping it. I would definitely recommend clear coating it once you've chipped it, just to make sure you don't do any extra damage to it. Then we give the same treatment. So it is a little bit tedious doing this, but if you're a strange person like myself, you'll enjoy it. I had a lot of fun doing it. You can just see how it just catches the light on different angles, and it's beautiful. I love doing it. It's good fun. You can see a few areas where I haven't masked off properly, because So instead of remasking it, respraying it, basically all I do is use the same paint that I used to paint the main colours and just thin it. It doesn't have to be a thick coat, just thin it down maybe 50% just to get a nice flowing paint, and just run it along the edges. It doesn't have to cover it completely, but it just needs to tidy up the edge there, so you can see how that's working with it applied by the brush there. And there's a few areas that I missed. There you go. So you don't want to do it straight out of the jar because it's going to be fairly different in contrasting colours, but if you thin it down, that certainly helps. The entire model gets a gloss coat, so this is Tamiya Clear, and just do all that prior to application of the decals. Make sure we're protecting all the paint, and we're also going to mask this off to do the underside, so it's always good to make sure it's all protected. So the underside here, we did the Sky Grey XF19, add a little bit of Tamiya XF2 flat white to it. You can see I've got the landing gear landing gear bay doors in position. They're not actually fixed in position, they're just held in position with a little bit of blue tack. And I'll come back over it and do a tiny bit of post shading with a slightly darker shade of grey. I'm not being too careful, I'm just putting it along a few areas. Just to break up the contrast a little bit, just to make it pop, give it a bit more detail. A little less single tone. So it's fairly thin what I'm putting on as well, so it's at least a 50-50 mix. And it was basically just the Sky Grey with a slightly bit of darker grey. Actually, I used a little bit of German grey, just a tiny bit. And we come back and then chip all this once again. Making sure to sort of go around the access areas, landing gear areas, anywhere it's sort of going to get high maintenance, high sort of level of ground crews working on it, things like that. Now the decals I used are the Nova Scale decals. They were fairly thin. They went down very, very well. But you can see in this picture here, there's a little white backing for it. So if you're putting it down over a darker colour, because the decals are so thin, it'll actually show through. So they give you these little white backings to put on. They work really well. However, I would suggest trimming them to the size of the decal, the size of the roundel that you want on there. So the white backing is a little bit bigger than the white on the top decal, and it shows through after you've settled the decals in place. You can see there's a bit of a difference, and I have to come back with a brush and a bit of a mix of my own blue to correct that. Finally put that back in position. Right, so everything's been cleared again, and I'm just touching up by eye as best I can the blue around the edge of the bottom decal, so it really did stand out quite well. So with a very, very thin blue paint, and it was just my own mix, I mixed it by eye to try and get the proper colour. Just sort of worked it from the inside to the outside just to blur that edge a little bit. But other than that, the decals worked flawlessly. They were really, really nice. So getting a clear coat, you can see here I've put on the propeller there. I used a bit of sky blue on the propeller and NATO black on the props, and chipped them using the same method. But here I'm just using the Tamiya panel liner black to sort of scuff up the surface. So yes, I'm using it to highlight the panel lines, but I'm also using it to add streaks and marks to the surface. Now doing this, I realised I actually hadn't covered the decals with enough clear, so I made a mistake and I hadn't actually covered them, but it actually worked out in my favour, because as I was working with it, the enamel from the panel liner started to actually affect the decals below, and I was actually able to wear them a little bit, which you'll see in the final photos, but it actually worked really, really well. So it was one of those little happy mistakes. I don't know if I'll try and replicate it on purpose, but it certainly worked out well. Now that canopy's in place, of course, and it's just held in place with a bit of Formula 560, just to hold it in position, and I'm going to remove that later. It's just like a white glue, essentially, if you're not sure what that is. Now, whilst I'll try and do most of the streaks in line with the direction of travel of the aircraft, on the fuselages I worked a little bit different to what I did on the underside. On the top side, sorry, and I let it dry, let the enamel panel wash dry to the surface, so basically come back with a cotton tip with some turpentine on it and use that to wear off the excess. You see here, I really don't let it dry, just get to work on it straight away, because I want to use it to alter the surface colour on the underside. So you see how I'm working it around. It's still in the panel lines. I'm working it over the surface, and I'm just removing, continuously removing the wash from the surface in various degrees. And this is what I was talking about with the decals. So you can see how I've figured out I can wear the decals down a little bit, and I'm just chipping it, so it gives it a nice sort of chipped effect. It worked really well. Really happy with it. So I ended up doing that on all the decals on the model, just to sort of help them match the overall finish of the paint in general. Here we're using some Winsor Newton white oil paint, and I'm just using it just to tone down some of the colours, make them look a little bit washed out, a little bit faded, not doing it too heavily. That's pretty simple. We just burnish it in with a dry brush. Now removing the landing gear bay doors, very sharp scalpel, and just put it in the gap there. And be careful on the outer parts. The inner parts are fairly thick, but the outer parts for the legs are quite thin, so just be careful when you're doing this not to break them. And you obviously don't want to damage the finish that you've put on the outside, but it gives you a nice finish because the weathering will actually match on the landing gear bay doors to the wing, so it's quite simple. And that excess blue tack in there, just get another bit of blue tack and dab it out. If you've clear coated the paint on the underside there, it's not going to affect it at all. It'll come off, just takes a little bit of working. There you go. Simples. Okay, so I paint in the lights on the end of the wing there. Get those in position. Now, this is rather lazy of me. I really should have marked this off and just sprayed it. Do not ask me why I decided I was going to do it with a brush. I have no idea. Afterwards, I was sort of scratching my head as to why I did it. But hey, them's the breaks. So I used the brush on that. Evergreen scale model strip. I love this stuff. So it's just little plastic strips. Now I use this to replicate the aerial because the kit aerial is quite atrocious. So just cut it to shape, put it in a place, and after looking at it I sort of realised it's a little bit high. So once I painted it with the NATO green, just give it a little bit of a trim. There we go. Easy, as easy as that. Certainly much better than trying to fix up the kit one. The kit one is horrible. Here I am using my pastels again. just for the exhaust stains, use them on the gun stains as well. Now, be very careful if you're trying to remove it with your finger like I did there, because you don't want to leave fingerprints in there. Now, I ended up applying it a little heavily there, and I'll just wipe it off with a brush with a tiny bit of thinner on it. Just put it in thinner and then dry it down so it's still a little bit damp, and remove it, or cotton tip as well. Works quite well, so you can see what I'm doing there. Alright, using super glue, because I've got the surfaces painted. I don't want to use a model glue, so it might not bond all that well, so use a super glue. And just use a bit of blue tack to hold the doors in position while they're drying. I'll do the same thing for the landing gear. It works really well. It's a nifty little trick. And you can see my overly complicated and expensive Tamiya jars holding the plane up there. Now, after I take the canopy off, just want to touch up that paint there. Use a bit of the khaki green, or was it the NATO green? NATO green, sorry. Use a bit of the NATO green just to touch up around the cockpit area before I put the canopy on. A bit more of the canopy glue. Just apply it with a bit of a toothpick and then put it into position. Takes a little while for it to dry, but it's not going to affect any of the clear plastic, which is not what you want at this stage, certainly. Just removing the front mask as well. Very careful when you're doing this. I used a sharp blade, but I'm always trying to work away from the surface, not towards the surface, so I don't scratch it. And as long as I can get an edge up that I can work on, I'll usually put the blade aside and work it with some tweezers after that, just to make sure I don't damage anything. But there we go. So there is the completed kit. I put the drop tanks on. I just kept them aluminium and kept them simple. But you can see on the tail there and on the other decals some of the weathering effects. I love the way that looks on the tail there. It really was quite a nifty accident. It worked really well. So I managed to enter this model in the 2018 Model Expo Victoria. Didn't get anywhere, didn't place, but that's fine. There was a heap of good models there. There's some really awesome stuff, some draw-dropping models, so I was not upset at all. My little plane looked a little bit, what's the way of putting it, a little bit poor next to some of the stuff that was there. There was some awesome stuff. But yeah, look, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe. I've got plenty of more videos coming very soon. I've done a lot of editing. I've just got to do the voiceovers for them now. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.